During January 7th school committee meeting, Chief of Data and Research for Newton Public Schools, Dr. Katy Hogue provided an update on the number of students enrolling in Newton Public Schools.
This is more of a enrollment analysis 101 presentation, including what we're seeing in the projections, and hopefully we'll capture most of the questions that you have, but I will be happy to answer any that come up at the end. And I will reiterate a couple of things that Dr. Nolan has already said throughout this presentation. So tonight I'm going to talk through the purpose of the report, as well as the key points that come out of this long document. Then I'll talk about what's happening now, which is our current enrollment. I'll talk about how we calculated the projections or our methodology for this report. We'll look at what we're projecting for the 5-year projections for the future. I'll talk about how we compare our projections to other external projections like NESDEC and the McKibben report. I'll touch briefly on how we're using the projections to plan for next year, which Dr. Nolan has already mentioned. And then I'll talk a little bit about the other pieces that we include in the report that are not just enrollment projections. So as Dr. Nolan said, the main purpose of this report is to provide enrollment estimates for both budget and facilities planning for the future. So most importantly, that's for next school year. And as Dr. Nolan said, we track enrollment through the spring and summer very closely with the goal of looking at the number of classrooms that we're going to need. So you'll see if you're looking at some of the tables in this report, when we look at our projections by grade level, sometimes they're not exactly, we don't hit the number 100%, but the main goal is looking at ensuring that we have the correct number of classrooms by grade in school. So while we might be off by 5 students at a school, our goal is to ensure that we have the right number of classrooms for that grade in school. And then when we look at the enrollment projections over the next 5 years, the goal there is looking at trends, what we think we're going to be seeing, because we do revise the report every year based on the current year enrollment, which does make adjustments to the projections over the 5 years. The other purpose of the report is to track historical enrollment by grade in school. So like we just mentioned, we have these reports going back many, many years, which is a really valuable resource, especially when we're looking at shifts over time, changes in district boundaries, and to have a sense of what has happened. So some of the key points that come out of this year's report, we'll look first at this year's enrollment. So in the fall, I did a preliminary enrollment report, which we were still finalizing enrollment numbers at the time. So this report shows the final enrollment numbers as of October 1st, as we report to the state. Enrollment this school year declined as projected in Newton, although the actual decline that we saw was slightly larger than what we projected last winter. So we saw a decline of 159 students in Newton this year from last year, which is a decrease of negative 1.4% from last year. We were projecting a decline. We calculate something called variance from projection, which is a measure of error of the actual enrollment compared to what we projected the year before. This year's enrollment resulted in a variance from projection of negative 0.5%, which means the actual enrollment that we saw was 61 students below what we projected last winter. Looking forward, we're projecting an overall enrollment decline for the next 3 years, district-wide K-12, followed by projected stability around 11,150 students, K through 12. And then I want to note that we add students from new and anticipated residential developments. We work closely with the planning department at the city to ensure that we have the latest information on residential developments, including the distribution of bedroom types for things that are in the planning or building stages. And we add students from those residential developments into our 5-year projections. So for this school year, students are being added, or for this report, students are being added from 18 residential developments over the 5 years, which results in an addition of 544 students over the 5-year projections from these developments. And I'll just note that we only include residential developments in the projections for buildings that have a special permit, comprehensive permit, or building permit. All right, so shifting to what's happening this year with our current enrollment, the graph on this page is looking at the variance from projection or our measure of error by level. So the blue line is the elementary school level, red is middle school, green is high school, and purple is the district. And this is looking at the variance from projection since 2016 through the current school year. As I mentioned before, our current enrollment K through 12 of 11,335 students resulted in a variance of negative 0.5% because we were projecting 11,396 students. Looking at our average variance over the past 10 years, omitting 2020 to 2021 and 21 to 22, which had impacts from COVID, our average variance at the district level has been 0%, meaning that our projections at the district level have been basically equivalent to the enrollment that we saw with some slight fluctuations. This is looking at 1-year projections. So what we projected in the prior year and then what happened the next year. This year, if we look at the 1-year variance by level, at the elementary school level, the variance was negative 0.4%, meaning elementary school enrolled slightly below what we projected. Middle school had variance of 0%. It enrolled basically at projection, and high school had variance of negative 0.5%, enrolling slightly below projection. So you can see in the graph, we sort of fluctuate right around this 0% line in the middle here, with the exception of 2020 to 21 and 21 to 22, where we had much lower enrollment than projected, which we believe is impacted by COVID. So shifting now to looking at the projections for the next 5 years, we have 2 different ways that we do the enrollment projections. One at the kindergarten, one for kindergarten projections, and then a separate methodology for grades 1 through 12. So I'll talk about kindergarten first. So the way that we did the kindergarten projections this year is we calculated a adjusted 5-year average of historical kindergarten enrollments by school. So we looked at the past 5 years of resident enrollment for each school, calculated an average, and then made some adjustments, which I'll talk about in a second. Once we calculate that 5-year average, we compare it to the number of births to Newton residents 5 years prior to the year in which those students would enroll in kindergarten. And this results in something that we call the birth to kindergarten ratio, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in a second. But this ratio essentially gives us a sense of a comparison of how many kindergartners are we enrolling compared to the number of students or children who were born 5 years prior. That ratio is typically over 1, meaning that we've got more students enrolling in kindergarten than were born to Newton residents 5 years prior, which makes sense as people are moving into the city. Once we calculate that ratio, we look at how that ratio compares to what we've seen historically, and is it much higher or lower than what we've seen in recent years. If it is much higher or lower, we make some adjustments to try to bring that ratio more in line with what we've seen in recent years in Newton. And that's what we did this year, and I'll show that on the next slide. Because those ratios were higher, we adjusted each school's projected kindergarten enrollment down slightly to reduce this ratio over the next 5 years, so it looks similar to what we've experienced in recent history. And we made those adjustments by school proportionate to the percentage of housing, the percentage of apartments, and the number of home sales that happened within each district, elementary school district. So the graph here and the table give you more information about what this birth to kindergarten ratio looks like. So the graph at the top is looking at the number of students who enrolled in kindergarten in the fall of each year on the blue line. And then the red line is looking at the number of births to Newton residents 5 years prior. So you can see typically we have more students enrolling in kindergarten than were born 5 years prior, as I mentioned before. The exception in this graph is the fall of 2020, where we had fewer students enrolled than were born 5 years prior, which we believe is an impact of COVID. And then the table below is basically calculating a ratio from the data that's in this graph. So you can see the year is the year that students started kindergarten, and then the ratio of births to enrollment is in the second row. Over the past 5 years, we've had an average birth decay ratio of 1.08 and a 10-year average ratio of 1.07, omitting 2020. The cells that are in gray on the right-hand side are the projections for the next 5 years. So you can see here that the ratios are still higher than what we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years. So we've got ratios ranging from 1.12 to 1.25, meaning that we're projecting more kindergarten students than we have seen in recent years based on the number of births. So it doesn't mean more total, but it's a higher increase of students compared to the number of children who were born to Newton residents 5 years prior. And the reason for that is twofold. First, we are adding, as I mentioned before, quite a few students from residential developments that are coming online in Newton, and we tend to see more students come in the elementary grade levels from new development, and anticipated increases in home sales as people start to get older and sell their homes for smaller living spaces. The methodology to calculate the enrollment projections for grades 1 through 12 uses a different method. This, for grades 1 through 12, we use a 5-year average cohort survival ratio, which is calculated by grade in school. So a cohort survival ratio, or a CSR, is another ratio that's looking at the number of students who are in a particular grade level and school cohort for the current school year compared to the number of students who were in that cohort for the prior year. So for example, if we're looking at the current second grade at Zervis, we would look at the number of students this fall in grade 2 at Zervis and compare it to the number of students who were in the first grade last year at Zervis to calculate the CSR. A CSR of 1 means that there is stability in that cohort. So you have the same number of students in each year. Doesn't mean it's the same students, actual kids, like kids can come and go, but that the total number stays stable. A CSR over 1 means that there has been growth in that cohort, and a CSR under 1 means that we have lost students in that cohort and school and grade. So we calculate these CSRs for the past 5 years by school and grade, and we average them. And then we use those average CSRs and this year's enrollment data by school and grade to calculate projections by school and grade for the next 5 years. We then add non-resident student projections and students from new developments to the projections by grade and school, and then we aggregate them by school, grade, and district to come up with the total numbers. So those two methodologies result in the data that is on this graph. This graph is showing you 15 years of actual enrollment in Newton at the district level in the lighter blue bars. And then the teal colored bars at the right-hand side are the 5 years of the projection. So as I mentioned before, enrollment's projected to decrease for the next 3 years and then stabilize around 11,150 students for the remaining years of the projection, as displayed in this graph. When we look at the 5-year projections by level, there's slight variation here. So the graph on this slide is showing you 15 years of enrollment by level, as well as 5 years of projections. So the top line, which is purple and blue, is the elementary enrollment and projections. We are projecting a decrease next year at the elementary level, followed by slight increases in the next 4 years. The middle line is the high school enrollment. So that one is red and blue. At the high school level, I know I'm going out of order here, but I'm going, in the order of the graph. At the high school level, we're projecting decreases for the next 2 years and followed by 3 years of slight increases or stability. And then the bottom line in the graph is middle school, which is green and blue. And At the middle school level, we're projecting an increase next year, followed by slight decreases over the remaining 4 years. So we always compare our projections to external projections to get a sense of, whether it feels accurate or we need to look in more detail at our own projections. Every year we compare our projections to NESDEC. So NESDEC is the New England School Development Economic Council. Okay, I think I got that one right. So that is a organization that provides projections for many school districts across New England. They update their projections yearly for us based on our October 1 enrollment, which we provide to them every year. So we always compare to them. And then we also have had a demographic analysis conducted by a company called Cropper GIS and McKibben. That was done in both 2019 and 2024. So we are able to compare both Newton and NESDEC projections to that report as well. It has not been updated since 2024, which is why it's not included in the report itself, because I would imagine that they would say it should be updated yearly based on what happens. So we put NESDEC in here, but I've got some graphs in the presentation to compare to their data too. Newton and NESDEC were both closer to actual total enrollment in Newton, both last school year and this school year, than the projections in the Cropper GIS report from 2024. So I'll show that here. So this slide is showing the variance from projection from 1 year projections for the Newton projection, the NESDEC projection, and the McKibben projections. So the first set of bars is for last school year, and then the second set of bars on the right is for the current school year. So both last year and this year, all three groups projected higher enrollment than what we actually saw, but McKibben's were the furthest from actual enrollment. So you can see last year, NPS variance was negative 0.2%, NESDEC was negative 0.3%, and McKibben was negative 0.6%. And those numbers were slightly larger this year. Just for the sake of comparison here too, this slide is looking at the projections for the next 5 years for the NPS projections, the NESDEC projections, and the McKibben projections. So the green line on this graph is the McKibben projections for the next 5 years. Blue is Newton's, and then red is NESDEC's. So you can see for next school year, NPS and NESDEC are both projecting slightly lower than what the McKibben report projects. And then over the 5 years, Newton and McKibben's report projections come kind of more in line with each other, while NESDEC's decline over the 5 years. And I do want to note that the NESDEC projections do include the projected students from new residential development as well. Okay, so shifting to how we use these projections, and Dr. Nolan already sort of mentioned this, so I won't go into too much detail, but we monitor enrollment very closely through the spring and summer by school and grade level. The shift that we made in recent years to online registration has made this much more accurate and timely, because we are able to see registrations in all stages of the registration process at a moment's glance. So that is very helpful. And when possible, we like to use the kindergarten census. So just another plug for people to please fill it out, regardless of what you might be planning for next year. It's just very helpful for us to plan for next year. We use this information to make any necessary staffing changes that might happen based on enrollment at individual schools. And then we also use the projections for buffer zone planning through the spring. So it helps identify potential areas where there might be not enough space in a building for projected enrollment. And we come back to you as a committee to make suggestions around changes or additions to buffer zones. All Right. And then finally, just shifting to the additional components of the report that are not directly related to enrollment projections, but provide some context. We include a section on student exits and entrances from the prior school year, and this looks at reasons for exit and entrance by both grade and school level. We have a section on non-public school enrollments from the prior year, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail on the next slide. And then we also have a detailed section of FAQs and tables around anticipated enrollment from residential development and how we're calculating that for each development. And then I just want to say a couple more things around the non-public school enrollment, because I know there were some questions around that. So we, as a district, conduct an enrollment census every January. It's currently underway for this year. That census collects information on all Newton resident students, no matter where they're attending. So we get information on what school every school-age child in Newton is attending from the schools themselves. We present a memo in the spring that reports on this census with the current year enrollment. So what you're seeing in the report is based on last January's census. I'll come back in the spring to report out on what we're seeing for this school year. And then I just want to note that the enrollment in non-public schools varies widely by NPS districted school. And what I mean by that is the address in which each child lives, like where they would be districted to attend. And this is most apparent at the elementary school level. So for last year, the percentage of school-age children attending non-public schools ranged from 6.7% in the Franklin district to 40.1% in the Ward district. So there's wide variation in the choices that families are making for their children.